All right, thanks everyone for joining our November Boston Office 365 user group meeting. We're going to jump right into it today. So just a brief intro to our organizers. My name is Dimitri. I'm with Turn Digital. We also have Mr. Mike Dixon with Wellington Street Consulting. And we also have Bill Gunning, who's part of the Executive Office of Technology Services and Security. So that being said, for those that were able to join us last month, we had a Q&A panel. We had a very lively conversation about the best ways to make out-of-the-box work for us, including tricks with Power Automate and a whole bunch of other great discussions. So thanks for those that attended. We actually are lying at the bottom of the screen. We did not record last month's session because it was just a Q&A format, but definitely join us for the next one that we're going to be having. So Office 365 updates since last time. We take all of the Master Center updates, we take all of the blog posts that we come across, and we kind of highlight some of the key things that have come up since the last time that we've met. Of course, Microsoft Ignite was just a couple of weeks ago, and there's been a ton of great updates that came out of Ignite. We're going to touch on a few of those here, but this is not intended to be an Ignite recap, but more about other things that are coming out more near term as well. So the first thing was something new announced at Ignite called Microsoft Loop, which is a new app for collaborative work. We have a short video here where it's really a combination of OneNote, Teams, SharePoint, and a few other backend technologies to really give you more of a real-time editing experience based on the Fluid framework. There's a few great sessions at Ignite that kind of cover everything from the intro level and diving a little bit more into it. The public preview is promised to us in the first half of next year, so keep an eye out for this. This could be a game changer in terms of how we collaborate. Moving forward, Viva Connections is now generally available, which is perfect time for Susan's session tonight. I'm not going to read off this slide because we're going to see a lot of these great things in the coming hour or so. So awesome to hear that this is GA. And in addition, the rest of Microsoft Viva is also GA now, including Insights, Topics, which has been for a while, Learning. And there's been a lot of great announcements at Ignite in terms of how this is shaping out to be one of the key cornerstone investments for Microsoft in this platform. Okay, getting into some more detailed items. So there's a new concept coming for the SharePoint templates, where we'll now, in addition to having from Microsoft being an option, we also have from your organization, where using PowerShell, you can start to craft your own templates and make it easier for your end users that have the ability to create their own sites to be able to select which templates to build it on. These PowerShell commands are coming early this month, and by the end of this month, it's expected that everyone should have this available to you. So I know a lot of our user group members here disable self-service site creation, many for good reasons around governance, but we also have ones that have this enabled. And if you have this enabled, this could be a nice little feature so that you can decide which of the out-of-the-box ones are offered to your users, as well as which are your organizational ones you'd like to expose. Moving forward, there's, anytime there's like a major UI change, we like to bring that up because, we've all been there where we're looking at a product that we've used day in, day out for months, if not years, and the button's just not there anymore. So in this case, the team's actions are moving. So today, you could right-click on a tab and have all sorts of different context menus dropping down. Now there's going to be the little arrow below that you'd be able to click onto to get to all of the different things that you can do, including refreshing the tab and so forth. This is going to be applied to all custom as well as first-party tabs across the board. There's a new Q&A app that's now in public preview for Teams, team meetings, as well as live events / webinars. So this gives you the ability to have, in-context question and answers in a little bit more structured way than just a flat chat that we have available to us today. So if your organization allows Teams apps to be added, then you can go ahead and add the Q&A app today and then give that a shot. We're also getting more updates coming to Planner. So this most recent update gives us rich text and images within the task notes. So Microsoft is going to be essentially converting all of your current just plain text ones into this new rich text format. So this will be a nice update because a lot of times we do need to highlight things or indent things or insert screenshots, and so forth within those notes. Coming up next, for all of our Exchange admins on the call, the classic Exchange Administration Council is being retired slowly and surely. The next thing that's on the chopping blocks is the mail flow features. So starting early next month, Microsoft's going to start disabling these in the classic Exchange Online admin. And of course, these are available to you in the modern counterparts in Exchange Online admin. Yeah, and I don't know about anybody else on this call, but personally, I still prefer the classic message trace. Not that it's necessarily any better, but it's the same thing I've been using for 15 plus years, so it's kind of sad to see that go away.
I second that.
But the new one does seem to give you a lot more filters and a lot more robustness to it. Moving forward, welcome update to the sharing experience in OneDrive. So today, if you click copy link, you don't really get a whole lot of information aside from just the URL to the file or folder. But going forward, when you click on the copy link, you're going to have the ability to actually decide whether people can edit or just view who these people are, and then you have the ability to send it directly or copy it across. You can also see who it is already shared with, which can help you make that decision whether you want to give this just to users with existing access or if you want to create a new shareable link. So this is going to be rolling out to targeted release tenants right about now. And then into December and January, this will be generally available to all the tenants. Another announcement is a little bit of a change to the Power Apps model. There's a new option with the pay-as-you-go plan. And ultimately, let's say you're building a Power App that anybody in the organization could potentially use. You might not always realize if it actually will be used, and you wouldn't know who is going to use it or how they're going to use it. So in many cases, it was cost prohibitive to license everyone in your organization for the Power App on the off chance that a small percentage might actually be using the app. So this new feature essentially allows you to go ahead and deploy your apps, and Microsoft will only charge you for those users that are using your app. So it's a fair way that you can distribute things broadly, but only pay for what you use. On the right here, we have the pricing model, which shows a reduction in pricing of per app per user, which is that if you know who those users are and you want to apply them, as well as a per user app, which gives you more flexibility. And of course, once you get the metrics of usage to understand who's actually using your apps, you could always switch those users over to the per app plan. Thanks to Turn Digital, the company I work for sponsoring the user group. They help pay the bills, keep our lights on, pay for all of the services behind the scenes, and of course, pizza when we're able to be back in person together. So with that being said, we want to turn it over to Susan for the main event, which is Viva Connections, bring your intranet to the next level. So Susan, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I can share my screen. So just to manage expectations, I am going to kind of take the conversation up a little bit, up a level a little bit, and talk more about I won't go into detail on how to set up Viva Connections, but I will give you a checklist of things to do. But I'm really going to focus on what really great intranets should have and how you should think about that in the context of Viva Connections. And if you are interested in my slides, which I may not go through all of them today, I am going to publish a link so that you can get them. So hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to acknowledge it if you can.
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thank you. And then let me see if I can get to my slides. Great. Okay, so as you are probably aware, or you may or may not be aware of this, but 90% of intranets actually don't answer the mail, and they tend to fail in organizations. But the last 20 months have been pretty focused on driving investments in internal comms technologies, and what I'm sure other consultants on the call are seeing this as well, but a lot of organizations are really interested in improving their intranet. And if they hadn't been thinking about it before, the pandemic, if having done nothing else, is sort of helping people think about that now. And so what I want to do is first talk a little bit about Viva Connections in general, and then show sort of what you need to think about to take advantage of Viva Connections so that your intranet delivers what your users are expecting. So by now, I'm just going to assume that almost everybody knows that Microsoft Viva includes 4 elements, soon to be 5 with the acquisition of Ally.io, and that really all in Viva is about creating great employee experiences. Viva Connections, if you sort of unpack it under the covers, started out a few years ago with what Microsoft was alluding to as the SharePoint app for Microsoft Teams. So although it is much more than that, Viva Connections is what enables you to take your gorgeous modern intranet and bring it where people are working inside Microsoft Teams. It's got a lot more superpowers than that, and I'll talk a little bit about those, but fundamentally, the most important thing to think about when it comes to Viva Connections is that it's an additional platform for delivering a great intranet. And in order to really take advantage of it and to make the best out of it, you need to have a great intranet to begin with. I know that there has been a lot of confusion, I hope with none of you, but some people have really thought that with the introduction of Viva Connections, that there's really no more need for SharePoint. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because all of Microsoft Viva is built on some of the foundational pillars that already existed in Microsoft 365, like SharePoint and Stream and Yammer, as great ways to connect the organization. And so basically, Viva Connections is building on that infrastructure. And today, you actually are going to have to create your content in SharePoint, although you can also create it in Microsoft Teams. The content that you create for your intranet, the pages that you create for your intranet, actually live in SharePoint. So what I want to do is really talk about how you can use Viva Connections and really good intranet practices to get that beautiful vision for a modern employee experience. Now, when you deploy Viva Connections, when it's deployed to your tenant, you will not call it Viva Connections. It's going to be your brand and your name and your branding and your name and whatever you want to call it, like Microsoft, for example, or the name of your intranet. When you are thinking about planning for Viva Connections, you're really thinking about both a desktop and a mobile version. And there are 3, let's call it experience pivots in the Viva Connections application. You'll notice the pivots more on the mobile device, because in a mobile device where all your content is smushed to a teeny tiny device, you experience the elements of Viva as tabs in the Teams, in the application within Teams. When you're looking at Viva Connections on the desktop, however, the desktop app of Teams, if you're looking at it on a big monitor, it's going to actually look very much like the SharePoint intranet on which it was based. So it really depends on how you look at Viva Connections, how you'll experience the 3 pivots. So I'm going to talk first about resources, because that's the one you're probably the most familiar with, because resources right now is effectively your global navigation that you've configured for your intranet. And in order to get global navigation, you need to have a home site. Cool feature that's been recently made available is that you no longer need PowerShell in order to create a home site. You can actually set your home site from within the admin center. So that makes things a lot easier. And that's a relatively recent deployment. Viva, the resources tab uses that global navigation to present the resources to your users. So you got to have a SharePoint site behind it to take advantage of resources. Today in the mobile app, the resources tab is nothing more than your global navigation. But in the desktop app, it's basically the app bar visualized inside Microsoft Teams. The second piece is also really a web part that you can deploy in your on your home site, and it's called the feed, and it is kind of a souped up news feed that gets its content from 3 different places. One is SharePoint News, the organization news site. So if you are publishing news on the homepage or for any other site for which you've embodied that site with the organizational news superpower, and you will see that news in the feed. It's going to be a combination of targeted and recommended content. You'll also see Yammer community posts that are post as an featured post to organization communities, and posts to communities or announcements in communities that you, the individual user, follows. And then the third kind of news that you will see in the feed is the brand new little feature that you may have noticed when you try to add content to your home site, and that is video news, if you will. Now, this kind of video has to be hosted in Microsoft SharePoint, not hosted in Stream. And so this is probably not news to anyone, but Stream as a content hoster is going to be, over the next couple of years, decommissioned. Stream is still going to provide all kinds of great services like video transcription and the playback capability. But your videos, actually, I would say even now, can be hosted in SharePoint. So eventually you're going to be moving all your videos into SharePoint. So I'm really advising my clients, for the most part, depending on which features they need, because there's not full feature parity yet. But for the most part, you can start thinking about storing your video in SharePoint. This is not going to automatically increase the amount of storage you get with SharePoint. So you're going to be careful about that. But according to Microsoft's telemetry, the majority of videos that are stored in Stream are meeting recordings. And those, as you know, have already moved to be stored in OneDrive or SharePoint, depending on what kind of a meeting you're recording. So all your training video that you're creating, you can really start thinking now about storing it in SharePoint. The other sort of little tip is that the video content that you want to promote in Viva Learning also has to be stored in SharePoint. So as you think about a strategy for where are we going for organizational video, start thinking about how I'm going to store video in SharePoint. That means I'm going to be able to use, I'm an information architect, I care about this, metadata to organize, tag, secure, and surface my video. And you'll start thinking about creating video portals using my favorite web part, which is highlighted content, which can allow you to surface video only content. You can also start thinking about how you might be able to use lists or gallery views of the document library to surface video that is now actually going to be hosted inside SharePoint.
Susan, we have a couple of questions from the chat here. Catherine asks if you can set your legacy site as a home site, and I assume by that she means a classic site. Catherine, please correct me if I'm wrong.
If that's what you mean, the answer is no. You have to have a modern site as your home site. To deploy Viva Connections, technically you need only one site to be a modern site, and only one site has to be in the cloud. But you really want to take advantage of everything. You really want to move your intranet to the cloud. But in order to deploy Viva Connections, you are only required to have a home site. That home site nav could actually link to content on-prem if you'd like to have a Franken intranet, as I like to call it. But not everyone's going to make their journey to the cloud in one big bang. So you can 100% have that sort of Franken intranet experience if that's what you want to do.
Okay. And Christine Green wants to know if there's any news about the possibility of having more than one home site within a single tenant.
The answer is yes. It is used to be when Microsoft first announced that they called this in the fullness of time. I think we are getting much closer to the fullness of time. It has been publicly stated that you will have the ability to have more than one instance of Viva Connections, which you can infer means we'll be able to have more than one home site in a single tenant. I have no insights onto the date, but here's what I've tweeted. The fullness of time has arrived, or it's soon to arrive. So it's not just a figment of our imagination.
Okay. And then another Christine asks if the labels of dashboard, feed, and resources, if those can be renamed.
Chrissy, not yet. as far as I know.
Okay.
Good question, though. Let's see, can we share videos hosted in SharePoint to be displayed on various sites? Yeah, this is the cool thing. This is why it's actually all good. Again, yes, you can display video no matter where it's hosted on any site. So the file viewer web part always lets you pull in. That's actually the web part that you're going to use to display video, by the way, is the file viewer web part for the foreseeable future. And it will include the player when the file that you are viewing is a video file. And Microsoft right now is going to throw a lot of goodness. The stream team is actually throwing a lot of goodness into the file viewer web part so that it's going to get all the same kind of superpowers you would have gotten when you viewed the video on stream. But because you can now have metadata and views and all the cool things you can do with document libraries, as long as you have permission to that library, you can surface that content, that video content, anywhere. So yes, just like stream channels across sites, but your channels are actually going to be metadata driven, and you'll display them using the highlighted content web part, most likely. Let's see. I'm going to keep answering these questions. Can you turn off the recommended news feature in this in the company feed and just have it promote items that you want promoted to your users? That is a really good question. I don't know the answer to that question. It is an AI-driven feed, so my bet is not now. I don't think you can do it now, but again, in the fullness of time, as Microsoft likes to say, and that's a good opportunity to get feedback. Okay. Let's see. Melissa has a Franken Intranet today. Is there a Viva Connections ideas? Oh, do you mean like, is there a modern version of user voice or a new version of user voice for Viva Connections? You'd have to go to that new site and see. I'm not really sure. But I believe that there probably is. Okay, so the last of the pivots, I'm going to return back to my slides, but keep the questions coming. I am really much more interested in answering your questions if I can than necessarily reading or looking at a bunch of slides. But the third pivot or area of Viva Connections is the dashboard. And the dashboard is really the way that you will be able to deliver what I'm just going to call them mini apps to targeted employees that will allow them to do whatever your app is designed to do. Now, your app can be as simple as a URL, or it can be as complicated as a SharePoint framework web part. And each app has really kind of two elements to it. It's delivered in a card, these adaptive cards. The first click on the app pops up a little mini opportunity, and then the second click can bring you to the full application. You can enter data and do all the kinds of things you want to do in that app. But remember, it's a snippet of content for an application, not necessarily the full experience of interacting with a third-party tool. Cards, just like most of the content in SharePoint these days, can be targeted via audiences. And one of the things you're going to start to see is a whole app store of cards with integration with different applications that you may have, like a card for Workday and a card for other sort of HRIS applications, so that you can start delivering things like how many, the number of vacation days I have left in the year, personalized to me, all in the card, targeted to me, delivered to me on my phone, in my desktop, in SharePoint, and in Microsoft Teams. So that personalized dashboard, also super cool. The best part for me about Viva Connections is that you get it for free. You don't have to buy anything extra. Now, that doesn't mean that you might not have to buy a web part to surface and buy an app, if you will, or a card, but the rights to use Viva Connections and all its great functionality is included with your existing licenses for Microsoft 365. As Dimitri said earlier, general availability for Viva Connections happened really in the Ignite week, which was the week of the 8th. And what happened then is we have had the preview app on desktop since March, but you had to deploy it with all kinds of magical scripting and PowerShell, and wasn't super hard because I was able to do it. But it is now much, much easier. The app is live. You don't need any fancy scripting or PowerShell. It is a first-party experience built by Microsoft. It works on your mobile device and it works in the desktop as well. So just to kind of sum up, what do you need for Viva Connections? Well, I'd like to say that you need a full, beautiful intranet, and that's what I'm going to talk about more about today. But you really just need one site, and it has to be a home site. So one site, one communication site in SharePoint Online. You need a home site. And again, you need the SharePoint admin to make something a home site, but it's now done in the user experience for the admin center. You need global navigation because otherwise the resources tab would be pretty sad and lonely. So do you have to have global navigation? Not really, but if you don't, that tab will be empty on your mobile device. Or it may actually link to, if you don't have global navigation today in the app bar, it points to the SharePoint start page, but you really wouldn't want to deploy Viva Connections until you've thought through global navigation. To create the dashboard, you will actually, it's just like editing a SharePoint page, but the elements, if you will, the web parts on the dashboard page are the application cards. And as I said, you can configure a card very, very simply to point to a URL, to point to an existing page on your intranet, and or you can deploy a full Teams app or a SharePoint framework app. The Teams admin, once you've done all this beautiful magic on the SharePoint side, then you need to make friends with the Teams admin because they will then have to enable the Teams app for Viva Connections. They will give it an icon that represents your organization, and then they'll install it and pin it for the entire organization or just selected users if you want to try it out. I'll take a breath and see if there's any questions about that. Okay, well, I'm going to share with you that my absolute favorite thing about Viva Connections is that if you haven't done this already, what the entire Viva employee experience provides to you is it actually sets an expectation that the intranet cannot be built by just comms or just IT alone, that we need to think about employees holistically. And in order to create great experiences for employees, we cannot have HR living in a silo, communications living in another silo, and IT trying to make the whole thing work together with everything separated. So one of the things that great intranet teams have always been is employee-centric focused and represented with a combination of viewpoints from HR, learning, comms, and IT. So what Viva is reminding us to do is that we now, in order to really do the right things by our employees, that we should start thinking about this collaborative experience with the employee at the center, not the organization at the center. And so thinking holistically is kind of a great option that Viva reminds us to do. So I've been a judge for an intranet beauty pageant for the last 8 years. And I can tell you that the best intranets that we look at have done this forever. So there's nothing magical about Viva introducing this as a good idea. However, what Viva is doing is reminding you that ultimately you're not going to be successful if you don't think holistically about the employee. So first, let's get a few things started. So first and most importantly, Viva Connections adds great capabilities to your intranet, but it cannot turn a horrible, crappy intranet into a great one. First, you have to have a great intranet. So I want to talk a teeny bit about what makes a great intranet. And for that, you need to make sure that you are thinking about the right things, that you have a clear vision for what you're trying to accomplish, and that you are focused on content and experiences that align with your business and the outcome goals that the organization is trying to achieve. A successful intranet is usable, it's useful, and there is a commitment to keeping it up to date. Nothing can kill your beautiful intranet quicker than a crappy governance plan. And I'll talk a little more about that as well. So you need a commitment. You need to think about how the intranet is going to align with your business values, because if you don't have that in mind first, it's going to be really difficult to decide, well, what applications make sense? What should we be investing in? So it's important to recognize what's important to the organization, because that will help you prioritize which apps you build first, which solutions you enable, and which experiences you create, especially if you're moving your on-prem intranet to the cloud and trying to move out of your Franken intranet experience and get everything into the modern experience. So we don't want to be like the number 11 thing on the top 10 investments that the organization is making this year. You want the intranet to be fully aligned with the big rocks for the organization, because that's what gets people's attention. And in order to do that, you not only need to understand where your org is going and what the key strategic initiatives are for the organization, but you need to understand what is important to each user. It's not about you, HR, or you, comms. It's about me, the reader or consumer of your organization. And virtually all of the unique capabilities of Viva are improved if you've identified your key audiences for your organization. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have target content to them, but in order to do that, in order to target content, you have to know who the audiences are that you may want to target content to. And that really comes back to thinking about the personas that are involved with the user groups in your organization. You're not going to create a persona to represent every individual, but you do want to take a look at what are the primary communities of people who do we have in the organization. And you're going to do some discovery work to figure that out. You may do some interviews, you may do some observational research, you may do some surveys. I mean, a great way to identify potential personas or audiences is to look at the org chart, to think about, do you have people who work in the field? And do field workers have a specific type of content, information, applications, forms, and resources that they need that is different from people who sit in front of a computer at a desk all day? So you want to understand who your audiences are and then validate them. One hint, one of my favorite audiences are new employees, because new employees have a time window in which they actually need some very, very specific types of information. And you might want to create an audience for new employees if you have hire date data in Active Directory, or this is another opportunity to think about, well, can I create an experience for new employees in an onboarding hub, if you will. As you're working with each persona, you're going to try to gather the kind of information that helps you understand what they need to get work done. What are their top tasks and asks? What apps do they use? And what barriers do they face today to getting work done? Your goal is to not necessarily deliver every single thing that someone needs, but to look for patterns to make people's lives easier so that you can try to prioritize which applications you should build and target to which groups in the organization so that your dashboard has the most value. As you're identifying your personas, it's always fun and helpful and important to document sort of their characteristics. And there's no really optimal approach for documenting a persona. I've given you a few examples here. You just really should write it down so that you have a good understanding of who you're building your solutions or targeting your solutions to. Now, this whole concept of audiences is critically important to get the most out of Microsoft Viva, but you don't have to have them. So you can absolutely deploy Viva Connections without an audience, without any audiences. But when you do, this is what will help you target information to your different personas. Audiences in modern SharePoint are Azure Active Directory groups, and you can get them by creating them in Azure AD, or you'll automatically get them for every Microsoft 365 group. So if you have a Microsoft team, you automatically have a Microsoft 365 group to which you can use to target content. So you can target not only the apps in the dashboard, but you can also target pages and documents, links, navigation elements, news articles, most recently events in the news web part, in highlighted content, in the events web part, in quick links, also relatively new, in the Viva Connections dashboard, and in resources and SharePoint navigation. So in order to take advantage of audiences, a couple things have to be in play. The container in which you have content needs to be audience enabled, if you will. And the place where you leverage the audience needs to be audience aware. And so not every web part recognizes audiences, but for now, the web parts I've listed here do. And this, again, will allow you to start creating experiences for each community that will be more personalized to them and therefore more relevant. Nobody ever said, I want more places to go. What they've usually said is they want fewer. The other sort of big rock in your planning for Viva Connections is to think about governance. And I want you to think about this as early as possible in the life cycle of your deployment. Governance is really about balancing risk with outcomes, and the governance decisions that you make should align with the business outcomes you are trying to achieve. Now, I've actually got a couple of resources. I'm not going to spend tons of time on governance in this presentation, but two things I think are fundamentally important when you're planning governance for Microsoft Viva All-In and for your intranet as well. Number one, or your entire Microsoft 365 environment. Number one, ask the right questions with the right audience involved. If you want to understand more about, well, what decisions should I be making? This first resource on the left is a comprehensive list of virtually all of the practical governance decisions you're going to need to make in order to deploy an intranet, Viva Connections, and Teams successfully. It is an ever-moving target because, you know, when you work in the cloud, things change all the time. So I keep this workbook up to date. And so actually I think I made 2 updates over the weekend. So anytime you grab it, it's current in that moment, but it may not be the same a week later because Microsoft is going to change something. It'll have a new capability available. This is a workbook where you can facilitate a series of conversations with your key stakeholders and then write down the answers. After you've determined what the answers to those decisions are, the last thing I want you to do is create a big, huge document that no one's going to read. I want you to turn that into a website that you can deliver inside your intranet, i.e. inside Viva Connections, bring it into Teams because it's part of your overall intranet, and therefore I can experience my learning content, my how should content in the same context where I'm creating content as well and where I'm getting my work done. And so the second link on the right is sort of my step-by-step approach for how you can actually create a site that will give you a place to put the answers to the governance question. So these 2 resources go together. When you're thinking about governance, it's not just about creating content, it's also about measuring how successful are we. And so you really want to measure what makes a difference to the organization. You want to look at business outcomes. Again, if you know what the KPIs are for the organization, you already have someone counting them, you're looking for, are we impacting them? And then you also want to look at system things so that you can look at items that might in fact be a proxy for business value. Nothing you can count with the system. Just because someone looked at a page doesn't mean that they actually got any value from it. But if someone is spending a lot of time on a page, that might mean the page is valuable, or it could just mean the page is crappy and they have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on. And so I think, by the way, Mike took the TinyCC links and copied them into the chat. So that's where you'll find the links. TinyCC is case dependent. So if you want to look at those links, make sure you actually use the upper and lower case values in the hyperlink. Okay, next thing you want to do, in fact, maybe this is the first thing you want to do, is to think about your information architecture. In the land of modern SharePoint, as you've probably heard a million times, the world is flat. So if you've got that hierarchical structure that you are migrating from, I have a client right now that has like one site collection for the entire intranet and then a gazillion subsites. And to take them to the modern experience, we're going to have to unpack a lot. The modern world of SharePoint is flat and crowded with site collections. And so you will no longer build an intranet in a small number of site collections. You're going to have a lot of them. In fact, we're not even going to use the word site collection anymore. We're going to ban the S word, subsite, from our vocabulary, and our entire intranet is going to be built with sites, and there won't be anything under any of those sites. So you'll have a lot of independent site collections. What you will use to create that intranet are sort of these three elements, and these are going to these will become the elements of your intranet topology. You'll have sites, you'll have hubs, and you'll have pages. The decisions that you're going to be making, and again, this is kind of a balance of ownership and experience, is what should be a site. Usually I say that if there's a different group of people managing the content and the topic itself is unique, and you want to publish news with that label, i.e. HR, or benefits for that matter, then that topic should get its own site. So every topic that you want to talk about uniquely or permission should likely get a site, because what we want to think about as we're planning our modern intranet is not having a gazillion places where we've broken permissions. And if you've been working in SharePoint a long time, you know that in that classic hierarchy, we got ourselves into trouble a lot by breaking permissions. So the first thing we want to do is try to make the scope of our sites align to the 3 permission levels that you get with a communication site. You have owners, you have editors, and you have readers. And that's how you want to think about it. Now, I just alluded to something. Now, I would have hoped that I would never have to sort of answer this question again, but I do find that a lot of people are still kind of curious about what kind of site do I need. Your intranet is built on communication sites. That is the type of site that you need, because your intranet is typically managed by a small number of authors, and most people have read access to the content. And so for the most part, you will be building your intranet with communication sites, not team sites. And so while we may have done that in the past, that is not the model for the modern experience. So we are going to use a collection of communication sites to create the intranet. Mike, you have a question.
Yeah, actually, I'm relaying a couple of things from the chat. Catherine asks, if you still have one site collection, is it possible to make the root site the home site now, even though you don't recommend it?
Here's the thing. Yes, your home site can have subsites, but those subsites can't be communication sites. So they themselves can't really take on the superpowers that you would want them to take on. So while it is technically possible, you will not have a modern intranet if your home site is a communication site and you have team sites below it as subsites. So I believe it is technically possible. I've never tested it out because I won't do it. Like, I can't. That's like, oh, that would hurt my head. But I don't think anything's going to break.
Okay. And one other question from Marcel, who asks, is there any hope of having reader permissions for teams?
Well, my friend, that actually doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So let's think about what the concept of a team is. A team are people working collaboratively together. And teams should have 2 permissions. I'm an owner or a member, and that's it. Conceptually, I'm going to go hard and fast that the answer should not be that there is anything other than 2 permissions for teams. Much simpler. I'm in or I'm out. That's what a team is all about. That said, can you get a reader group for teams content? Let's call it the docs that live behind a team, or the pages that live behind a team. Oh, let's just name it. The team site that lives behind every team. The answer to that is yes, you 100% can get a reader experience on that back end data very, very easily by, I'm going to go to the next topic, by associating that little team to a hub, and in that hub creating a reader permission group, and then asking each team site owner who joins your hub to accept the read group that was created for the hub onto their team site. It will not give them access to the team and the chat, but it will give those people read-only access to the content that lives behind the team. So in principle, I don't think it makes any sense whatsoever, but in practical reality, there is a way to make that happen. And the scenarios in which I might actually say, all right, we'll do it, is when you have a small organization and most of the work is being done in little teams. But there is an executive group who says, I don't want to be added to every team. That's too much noise, but I need to be able to see every piece of content that my folks are creating. And that's what I'll use the reader group for. I'll connect all the teams to this entity called a hub, add a read group to the hub, and that way the executive group, this small number of people, get read access to all the content. So why do we need hubs? We need hubs because we used to love that subsite thing, and that subsite thing actually had a few advantages, not the least of which was sharing navigation and creating a scope for search. Well, that's what hubs do for us in the modern world. And you can have up to 2,000 of these lovely creatures in your tenant. And what it allows you to do is create families of related sites. Mike, before I do that, did you have any other questions that I should have caught in the chat?
That's everything that's in there, but your little thing there actually reminded me of a slide that I saw in one of your previous presentations. How many pizzas should I need for a team?
Mike, so you've seen my governance presentation. So I usually say that a team is a two pizza. You could feed a team with 2 pizzas for lunch. I am not a big fan of what Microsoft allows, which is an organization team. I'm just never going to use it. I will never tell anyone they should use it. A team is a group of people who are working collaboratively to get something done. When a team gets to be several hundred people, that doesn't feel like a team to me. And I certainly don't want to chat with them, but I may want to be able to communicate with them in a different way. And I might, in fact, create a SharePoint communications site targeted to a large organizational entity. I'd probably open it to the entire org, but recommend that all of the members of that group follow it. So it's not like we're locking it down, but the information is accessible to all, but relevant to some.
Okay, and there was one other question that I missed, so thank you for calling me out on that, Chrissy. Would you recommend Teams adoption as a prerequisite to Viva Connections?
No, not necessarily. In fact, I think Viva Connections delivering your intranet in Teams can actually help people with Teams adoption. Let's call it the right kind of Teams adoption. What I'm seeing these days is virtually every organization is using Microsoft Teams for meeting, but not meetings and chat. But virtually none of the ones that didn't do any planning, the ones that kind of tossed Teams over the fence in response to the pandemic, virtually none of them are leveraging Teams for the other things it can do, like host your files and bring pages from SharePoint into the team so that your legacy experiences with SharePoint can be visualized in a team. And so what I see a lot is that organizations that were SharePoint centric and had private team sites or were using SharePoint sites successfully threw out Teams to the organization without doing any planning for what they were going to do with the team collaboration stuff that they already had in a SharePoint site, either one in the cloud or one on-prem. And what happened is now every organization has 2 sites that are private and team collaboration, and content could live in one or both or copied or duplicated, and everyone's just massively confused. And so I think that we need to, one of the ways to kind of rationalize all of this is to make sure that we're educating users about what is, the connection between Teams and SharePoint. And this is really important for what I'll call SharePoint-centric organizations. And what we want to take a look at is if we are in that two teams kind of scenario, two SharePoint sites scenario, we want to think about combining them together and setting it up so that we are getting the best of Teams and the best of SharePoint all brought inside Teams. All right, so Marcel is asking, executive want access to everything. You do not have to add them to the SharePoint site. Now, the way that you do this is you create the way that you will give the executives access to everything is that you're going to create a Microsoft group that includes all executives, and then you'll add that group to the read group for the hub. That's the easiest way to do it. So you take all those private teams and you associate them to a hub, one or more, and for every hub that you create, you add the reader. There is a relatively new configuration called a hub reader group, and you want to add the executives to the hub reader group. Then when you associate a team site to the hub, you are actually adding a read-only view to the content on the team site that backs the team. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. All right, so how do you decide if you need a hub? Well, I think there's really only 3 scenarios, and you can fight me on this, but I think I'm going to come back. I think I can make every single scenario for a hub come to one of these 3 scenarios. One is, I want to create a shared experience for a function or an organizational entity. Think HR. Almost every HR is going to need a hub. Or I want to create a shared experience for a geography, like Austria. And Austria HR is itself a site, and we have 2 choices with that site. Join it to the global HR hub or join it to the Austria hub, because an individual site can belong to one and only one hub. That means I can have one and only one parent. However, global HR can have a link in the nav that points to all of the local HR sites. They're just not in the search scope. However, when I'm designing to create an employee experience for an Austria user, we need to think about what is their expectation for what they would want to be able to find in search, because one of the biggest benefits of a hub is it creates a narrower search scope than the entire organization. And if the Austria user is going to want to find content in German and HR content only related to them, then the appropriate hub for the Austria HR site would be the Austria hub. Now, we can make hubs link to each other, but you can only belong to one, with an exception I'll mention in a minute. The third model for hubs is a portfolio. And that's when I was saying, executives need access to all the team sites or all the teams. Well, the easiest way to do that is to create a hub, associate all those teams to that hub, or create multiple hubs based on your organizational needs, and then add the executive group as a hub reader, which is a special permission for the hub to all of the sites that you join. So a portfolio model would be kind of model number 3. And last month, everyone should now see that we have the ability to connect a hub to another hub. Now, what this gives you, and it really doesn't give you anything more than this, is an additional search scope. It will not, when you join a hub, one of the things you're kind of doing is making a contract with that hub saying, hey, if I join you, whatever theme you had, I'll take it. I'll be part of your search scope. I'll be part of your all sites in the hub roll up. And we've now created a family. When you associate hub A to hub B, none of that magic happens. The only benefit you're going to get is now, if I am searching from global sales, I will find content from the 3 sites that belong directly to the global sales hub, and the 2 sites that are effectively associated, 2 hubs that are associated to global sales. So associated hubs, which is a capability we've been really waiting for a long time, is primarily a search scope. You can have up to 3 levels in associations of hub, just like you can have 3 levels of navigation. So there's this magical concept of 3, and just like a hub, it has to be, the association between hub A and hub B has to be established in the admin center. So that's my whirlwind overview of hubs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then finally, how do you decide whether you need a site or a page? Well, largely, I usually make this decision again by permissions, and because the content is very much associated with the topic of the site, same people are managing it, and I don't have thousands of pages associated with that topic. So thousands is a bit of an exaggeration. But when I create benefits experiences, I usually create one page per benefit. And most organizations have 20, 30, 40 benefits that they offer, and we organize them by sort of what they are topically related to. That's one of the reasons I typically give benefits its own site, even though it's almost always part of HR, because there's just a lot of content to manage. And in larger organizations, the benefits team is almost always different from the talent acquisition team or the recruiting team. Even in smaller organizations, sometimes it's different people. So having multiple sites connected in a hub makes a lot of sense. Other key thing to be successful with Viva also means planning navigation. And so you must have global navigation to get the resources tab in Microsoft and Viva Connections. One of the things you may have noticed at Ignite is that very soon that app bar that you see, which is where you're going to manifest the global navigation in SharePoint on your home site. It has to be created from SharePoint right now. And the global navigation appears on any modern SharePoint site in a little teeny left rail, whether it's a team site or a communication site. And very soon it is going to get an additional app. So today there's 4, and soon there's going to be a 4th one reflecting Microsoft lists. And so that is coming soon. That was announced at Ignite. And instead of the little house icon that you can change to be whatever the logo you have for your intranet, the globe is news. The globe are sites. The little newspaper is news. The next one is documents, and then we're going to have lists as well. Your nav can be targeted so that different people in the organization see different things. With navigation targeting, you can target up to 10 audiences per individual link. And so that's why you really want to be sure that not only have you planned your audiences, but you've communicated to the relevant people what those audiences are and who's in them, so that they can know effectively how to use them. So the app bar is really a collection of curated links, dynamic links that come from the graph, and that you don't have any control over. And then it's also controlled based on your actions. So the sites that you visit frequently and the ones that you follow are basically tagging around no matter where you go in the app or in SharePoint and in the Viva desktop. Right now, the My Sites thing is not going to follow you around on the mobile experience, but you will see it in the desktop app for Microsoft Teams. Just in case you're editing your global nav, be patient, because it doesn't show. Links take a while to, I would say, the hamster that's running the intranet takes a while to get all of the updates in your global nav to have them be reflected in the app bar. So when you're thinking about global nav, you want to think about things that users need all the time persistently. You cannot have a link to every single site in your intranet in the global nav. Don't even bother. And if someone says to you, well, we need to be able to find everything in 2 or 3 clicks, send me an email and I'll send you a list of all of the articles and research that will debunk that theory. So no, you do not need, your users are not going to complain if they have to click more than once or 2 levels down to find the content that they're looking for. But if the label doesn't match the target, if those clicks are stupid and don't match their mental model, they're going to not be very happy. So whatever you do as you're thinking about navigation planning, don't assume you know what you're doing. I do this for a living, and I think I still always learn something new when I test. And so don't just build your nav. Make sure you test it with regular people. All right, Mike, I see you want me to shut up so you can ask some questions.
Chrissy asks, for metrics, would you recommend leveraging the Teams connector in Power BI, the targeted SharePoint home site, or both?
Chrissy, I really don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you mean by the targeted SharePoint home site, and I don't know what you mean by metrics in this context. Do you want to come off mute and ask?
Is Chrissy being unusually shy today?
I know, really. Chrissy she's not afraid of talking. Especially not to me. So when it comes to metrics, by the way, I think what you want to be thinking about is, what am I interested in? Before you think about metrics, you should really think about, what do I need to know and what am I going to do with that information? Don't knock yourself out capturing metrics if no one can tell you how they're going to use that information to improve or change. So depending on what you're trying to do, every site has a very rich collection of insights that are getting better every day, so that the site owner can look at metrics about what's being accessed, what's being used, what devices are people using to come to my intranet or to come to my site. There's additional metrics that you can see at the admin level, and we have metrics for Teams owners, Teams at the admin level, and SharePoint at the enterprise level. If you need more metrics that persist for longer than 91 days, and you want to be able to slice and dice your content in different ways, then metrics is a space that Microsoft has really left to third parties, and there are a number of them that can help you get improve or get you more information that you can get natively out of the box. So Christina's saying she just noticed the ability to do this. Is this how you make the hub-to-hub connection? The answer is no, actually. You cannot do it. What you're seeing there is if there was a connection made. The connection has to be made in the admin center. But if you do see this, this means that you have the ability, that superpower has landed in your tenant. I believe it's actually everywhere at this point. So again, only the admin can make a hub. Only admin can make a hub-to-hub connection. What you're seeing here is if this hub had a parent, you would see it manifested here. You can also see its children, and when you are creating navigation links in the parent hub, in the hub, you can actually, it's kind of like on a one-time only basis, get quick instant links to all the peers and the parents. However, as you add more peers and parents, it does not automatically update in the nav. You'd have to disconnect it and remake it. And the labeling for the, I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but the labeling for connecting hubs in the nav doesn't make sense to anybody. So you're going to have to rename it. Therefore, when you add more sites, you're going to break it and you'll have to undo it, redo it. And so, yeah, but again, that's probably not what you were asking for. The answer is yes, you need to be in the admin center for that. Okay, so Chrissy can't talk. Am I pulling in the SharePoint home site and or the relatively new Teams connector in Power BI to massage the data? It is SharePoint, so yeah. Well, Viva is delivered in Teams, but the metrics on the SharePoint part of it, your intranet, those are not Teams metrics, that's SharePoint metrics. So I don't think you're going to get anything in the Power BI connector for Teams, because while it is a Teams app, all the content and actually the metrics you want are the SharePoint side metrics. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, Chrissy, but that would be my take on this. So by the way, data and testing your nav is really the best way to overcome the worst challenge to managing navigation, and that's politics. So I can't tell you how many times I have been informed that we are going to have something in navigation that makes zero sense, because there's some higher up person that wants to see their baby in navigation. Here's what I would tell you. If you don't have data to back it up, you may not have a choice. Don't lose your job because you're telling the CEO that their favorite link can't be in the navigation. But again, what you want to think about is, can I have data to say whether it's actually even relevant? So navigation isn't the only way that content gets found, by the way. And one of the most important things you should think about when you are planning your intranet is search. Search bookmarks are great. They actually work in Viva Connections, because Viva Connections, when you're searching right now from the Teams app, you get two choices when you're searching. Do I want to search in the intranet, or do I want to search inside Teams? If you choose intranet, you're going to pop open a browser, and because you are operating effectively from your home site, all your search bookmarks will be visible to you. So don't leave search to chance. If you know a whole bunch of keywords, or misspellings that people might use to find or look for content that you want to promote, use the search bookmarks. Extraordinarily helpful and makes that search experience so much better for the user. If you have a bookmark and you are also deploying Viva Topics, the bookmark will actually show up first because you have curated an answer to a specific keyword. And so it used to be the other way around. What we've asked for is both, but the bookmark first. So if you are thinking about Viva Topics, remember that you should still think about how can I curate and create great search experiences for my readers. And so we talked about integration with the dashboard. Great planning is about that. Just if you've never done it before, this is what you should now see now that it's generally available. On your home site, if you are the owner of the home site, you should see set up Viva Connections. And then if you click that, you're going to get this little guy. And when you, by the way, when you click it, what will happen is a new page will get created in the Site Pages library. And the page will be called, wait for it, Dashboard. And you can edit that page from the back end by going to Site Pages and looking for the dashboard, or from the front side by clicking on the dashboard button. And that will present to you a page that where you add, instead of adding web parts, you're adding adaptive cards. And so you get this great little experience. It's very easy to do. These are the currently available cards in my tenant, and I know more are being added soon. If I click on Teams app, you'll see a whole bunch of Teams apps that you can add. And then this is again where you're going to find that page inside your Site Pages article and Site Pages library. So in the slides, which I posted a link to earlier, you can just take a look at what's in the dashboard. And again, you don't have to think about your dashboard as being be all end all to everything on day one. You can think about a journey. Hey, set up some quick little URLs to existing apps, all the way up to SharePoint Framework apps. If you have them, by all means, create them, add them, and target them. When you add a Teams app to your dashboard and you are looking at the intranet from the browser, the user is going to be prompted to open the app in Teams or open Teams in the browser to actually use the app. If you are in Teams and you are opening a Teams app, it just opens the way any app would open. So you got one more opportunity to sort of bring the intranet to the people, and that is to integrate SharePoint and Yammer. Now, you do not need to have Yammer deployed in order to use Viva Connections. But as Microsoft likes to say, if you really want to take it to the next level, all these apps work better together. And so if you add Yammer, if you have Yammer communities, you can now designate them as official communities. You can use featured announcements in those communities that will help boost that content into the new feed web part. And as you probably know, you can embed Yammer conversations on SharePoint pages. And then if you bring the community's app into Microsoft Teams, you now have a native connection between Yammer and Teams, and any app mentions in Yammer are going to get promoted to the Teams activity feed, and then the Viva Connections feed delivered in Teams is the whole story, better together, all in one place. And so social engagement for your intranet makes just a way better experience, and that's another good place to think about. I'm just going to try and quickly go through these so that I don't take up too much more time. Home site, as I said, you can't have an intranet without a place to land. You can't have Viva Connections without a home site. And when you think about the experiences on your home site, you really want to think about balance again. It's about a little bit of me and a little bit of us. It's not so much we, because that's the team's experience. It's really about the organization promoting content and content coming to me because I'm in a particular audience. So personalized content to me. And it should look really beautiful, and we want to make it a great experience. But I can tell you right now, nobody comes back to your homepage because it looks good. They come back because it's adding value to their work. So when you're figuring out what goes on my home site, you got to go all Marie Kondo on it. And you're not going to say, hey, do you spark joy? But you're going to ask each piece of content, are you adding value to our readers? Are you something that's helping promote the business, the main organizational big rocks for our business? Are you adding value? And if so, then absolutely, I will want you on my homepage. And then, of course, one really important thing to keep in mind is that great intranets are never done. You need to plan for change, prepare for change, build a champions community so that you have friends to help promote change. Think about measurement metrics. And I'm glad you asked that question, Chrissy. I think you want to think about page insights, conversation and community insights, because you really want to understand what's working for my readers. And don't think you can do any of this without thinking about training or education. And so people who create content and are going to use audiences need to know what those audiences are. They need to know who's in those audiences, and you need to communicate that to the right people at the right time. And so we really do want to think about balancing personalization with things that everybody sees and making sure that everyone in the organization is equipped to be successful. One little hint: teach people how to search. Most people actually don't know how to do it. And any search skills that you give them, like using wildcards and capital AND or capital OR to exclude or include content, all those little superstar tricks work in their private life when they are, bingling or Googling for content on the web. So people tend to be really interested in learning how to search better. And when you do empower people with that skill, their intranet experiences tend to go up. So as you think about deploying Viva Connections and how you can bring your intranet to the next level, it's not just about Viva Connections. It's really about having a great intranet to begin with and taking advantage of all the great capabilities that Microsoft gives us in the modern intranet experience. And I promise you, if you think about these things and be more strategic, 100% of your intranet is going to meet or exceed expectations, and you won't be in the sad crashed rocket ship type of organization with an intranet that doesn't answer the mail. So that's my content. That's what I've got for today. Here's all the different ways you can get in touch with me. And again, the link to where you can find my slides if you're interested. So any more questions? Now, Christine has a question about intranet in a box and will they work in Viva Connections? I think you're going to have to look at each vendor. The requirement is a home site. And so to the extent that the particular intranet in a box solution leverages the home site, the answer is yes. But again, each vendor will be a little bit different. Marcel is asking, what are the parts of Viva that you need to pay for? It's a complex question. So you don't have to pay for Viva Connections because you get that, but you might have to pay for an app that you purchase to use with Viva Connections. You do have to pay for Viva Topics. There's no version of Viva Topics that is free. There's a couple of different ways to buy it. Announced at Ignite was the ability to kind of package up the 3 Viva modules for $9 per user per month. If you were to buy one at a time, it's $4 per user per month per module. Viva Insights has both a paid and a free component. And so the personal part of Viva Insights is available to you at no additional charge. You may have already seen it in Microsoft Teams and in Outlook, and you may already be using the Viva Insights app. If you want the organization insights, that's $4 per user per month, or you're buying it as part of the package. Viva Learning has both a paid and a free component as well. I'm not going to be able to rattle off at the top of my head what you get with the free and the paid, but you will, because Viva Learning also allows you to integrate resources that you may pay for. Viva Learning, the free version, might expose to you content you do not have access to. So that is required a LinkedIn Premium license in order to access. So you may actually be exposed to content if your admin has not disabled it, that you may, your organization may need a subscription to. But you can also wire up SharePoint content into Viva Learning if you want to deliver content or learning content that you've developed in either Word, any Office file format or video to users in Viva Learning. So again, there's a paid and a free component of Viva Learning as well. Is Viva GA for all sectors, including GCC? That is a great question. Not positive that it's the case in GCC, but I think you could look in the roadmap, in the Microsoft roadmap, to find that out. What is a great video that shows Viva Connections from soup to nuts? Oh my God. You know, it really depends. There are some great videos at Ignite that will talk to you about that showcase how you deploy Viva Connections. Unfortunately, what they tell you is how to deploy Viva Connections, not to have a great intranet that Viva Connections will help you deploy. So there's actually very good documentation, by the way, for deploying Viva Connections from soup to nuts, every single step that you need. So that you could definitely look for the Viva Connections documentation. It's really very well written. And you're saying our IT department says our email is on-prem, but the rest of our internet is in the cloud. I honestly, this is kind of a little bit above my pay grade. Dimitri might be able to answer this question, but I think you could still have it if your email is on-prem. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think email is a dependency here necessarily. But if you subscribe for alerts or things like that, you might run into some challenges. It's one of those scenarios that's not the least resistance forward. So some of this you might just to give it a shot and see if it works well. Okay. Awesome job, Susan, as always. Thanks for walking us through Viva Connections. So I'm gonna steal the screen share back for a few minutes, and we do have some closing slides, including a raffle. So we would like to share some of the upcoming community events. There's a variety of ongoing calls within the Microsoft community, as you can see on this slide. If you go to PNP, excuse me, pnp.github.io, you'll be able to see some additional ones as well. But really, I mean, there's a lot of great ways to stay in touch if you're interested in these types of topics. And in terms of upcoming events that are more conference-like, so putting aside the SharePoint Saturdays that happen every weekend around the world, there is the Microsoft 365 Collab Conference coming up in Vegas in December. I know a lot of people that spoke at Ignite will be there as well. We also have the Power BI Summit, which is going to be an online event coming in March. So definitely check that out if you're into the business insights side of the world. Christine also raised in the chat that there's also the Power BI Fest this weekend, Friday and Saturday. Thanks, Christine. Then we have some additional recurring ones as well. Women IT Pros, Power Addicts, Power Hour. And if you know of any others that are recurring, please drop us a note. We'll be happy to put this on these slides as well. We do have a few sister and brother groups that are in the area. We have the Rhode Island SharePoint user group. It's run by DRC Hess. We have the Hartford user group that Jared runs. We have the Granite State user group that Julie and Jim run. And there's a few others that are related, including Azure and Power BI in the Boston area. So check those out if you're interested in more of these types of sessions. So that being said, we'll take a quick minute here, being a user group and all. If anyone has any specific questions, anything and everything under the sun related to Office 365, where you'd like to share a tip or if you've run into a problem, we could take a few minutes here to see if we as a community can help you out. Okay, if you're being shy, we will stick around a little bit afterwards for drinks, so you can always talk through it then as well.
Hey, I have a tip that I only just discovered. If you want me to, I'd love to be able to share this. And I may be the only one who didn't know this, but as I said, I'm an information architect, so I really care about metadata. And one of the things I've always not loved about the Teams files experience is that while it shows you the metadata, you can't edit the metadata. Did you know that you actually can? And like, am I the only person who didn't know this? Please tell me other people didn't know that.
No, I didn't know that either.
Okay, good. Well, here's how you do it. Instead of when you're adding a tab to your channel, instead of adding the, instead of adding the SharePoint document library tab, add the SharePoint site tab. Find the site that you want, Then it'll show you the library, the content in that site. Click on Documents or whichever library you want to see. That tab will now show you a full rendering of the library with the little eye guy, with the information panel, so that you can now, not from the file tabs, which totally sucks. It should be on the files tab, but you can add a corresponding matching tab that actually allows you to edit the metadata and get all of that experience right from within Teams. So I have a team that I'm working with there, and their content has a ton of metadata. And they are kind of hesitant to live their life in Teams because we thought you could only edit the metadata in SharePoint, but you can. And so this was like a game changer for them. They were clapping and jumping up and down. I'm like, I'm sorry, I was just clicking on a few things and discovered it. So anyways, if you didn't know it, it's kind of a cool trick.
That's awesome. Yep, I learn something new every day.
I have a quick tip to share. And I'm kind of embarrassed that I just noticed this, but there's a fire hose of updates out there. I just learned about flow trigger conditions. So apparently, if you have a lot of flows, or you have flows that run frequently, and maybe one of your next steps is filtering out that flow and then terminating it instantly, there's a way that you can. If you go to the triggers settings, so that's the very first step in any flow, you go to the settings of that. In the settings, you can set some parameters that filter out that flow from running. And what's really significant about this is the filters that are put in there will cause the flow to not run, and it will not count as a run in your tenant. Which is just huge and fascinating. So if anybody out there is running up against these issues of having flows that run very frequently and stuff like that, it's trigger conditions is a wonderful thing.
Awesome.
I just learned about that. I was hoping that it was something new, but then when I looked at the Microsoft documentation, it came out like last summer.
Nice. Well, we have a question from Anantha regarding is there a way to find top pages beyond the last 7 days? And Susan just posted in the chat, you can pivot to show up to 90. Just to expand on that, for many of our clients that we build intranets for, we'll actually integrate Google Analytics using a very lightweight SharePoint framework web part, or extension rather. And in doing so, you pretty much have all of the metrics that Google Analytics can offer you. And for some clients that actually want to track usage by department or by a little bit more granularity than just face value, we can also pass custom tags into Google Analytics. Usually clients don't want to pass the actual username because it's a little bit too much like Big Brother, but at least pulling some metadata from the user profile, like their department, is a fairly common one. Christy, looks like you have a Teams tip.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me? I switched mics. Oh, okay, cool. Yep. For some reason, the mic on the Logitech video cam wasn't working correctly, so I switched to my Surface 2 headset. So I do have a tip. It's actually more or less a Power BI tip. Now, it was something that was pushed out early in the year, but I don't know for any of the Power BI user out there on the Power BI desktop. There's the search bar, and the search bar was pushed out that not only can you actually search for data, for content, for data sets on Power BI on the Power BI search bar, it's also designed to search for the tools, the tasks, and everything, because everything is hidden within the multiple ribbons. So you could actually leverage that search bar on Power BI and just start typing, and it'll pull that right up. The other thing too, and I think it's still in beta, it hasn't yet hit full GA yet, is the flow, the Power Automate within Power BI. You can initiate a flow within Power BI. It's kind of cool. You actually see your Power Automate home screen within the Power BI desktop. Sorry, I'm a data geek, so.
Awesome. Thanks, Chrissy. And I see Christine Green has a Teams tip. Christine? So I'm not sure if Christine can go off mute, but Christine mentioned that you can now color code your Microsoft Teams calendars, which is pretty nice.
Yeah. That was it. Sorry, it was just a screenshot of what it looks like when you color code your calendar.
Yeah, and I was really excited. I've been color coding my calendar events for a very long time in Outlook, and I was actually pleasantly surprised when I saw those same color categories from Outlook come over into the Teams calendar, and by extension also to the mobile devices. So awesome feature.
It's nice.
And Melissa, you have something about recurrence for flows?
No, that was just a screenshot to show the condition, the trigger conditions and where you can find it. So if you look on that screenshot near the bottom, there's a little space where you check it off if you want to use that. That's all that was.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
I see Catherine has a question. If you don't have email in the cloud, you can't use the approval flows, right? Just double checking. I don't think so, but Mike, I think you'd probably have the definitive answer.
You would think that, but I actually haven't had any clients that have on-prem email in many, many years now. So I'm not sure.
It's always interesting when you have like mixed scenarios where some mailboxes are in the cloud, some are on-prem. And I know just by having that hybrid connection established, you unlock a lot of functionality that you wouldn't have if you strictly kept Exchange on-prem. But I think in my mind, at least the lines kind of blur when you get into these specifics. You can easily test it out. I think that's worth checking out to see if it'll work. Okay, so just in the interest of time, we'll keep moving forward here. We can talk more after the recording ends and we can have a drink. But thanks once again to Turn Digital, keeping our lights on. That being said, we also would like to thank all of our past sponsors. We've been running this user group now for almost 7 years, Mike, 8 years. And over the years, we acquired, quote unquote, for free BassBug and kind of took over the SharePoint side of things there as well. But I mean, ultimately, these are all the vendors that have really helped us through the years by sponsoring pizzas, by helping pay for our meetup costs, for our MailChimp costs, and regulatory filing fees and everything else.